Dr. Kaushik Talukdar, who's a strength and conditioning coach, lecturer, and sports science research scientist specializing in athletic development, human performance, and injury prevention with over 14 years in the field. Primary focus has been to bridge the gap between research and practical application, sports and exercise science. The subject of his research and teaching is exercise science with focus on youth athletic development, sprinting biomechanics in young females, cricket, physical preparation, strength and conditioning, fitness foundation, applied anatomy, applied exercise physiology, and biomechanics in human performance. He's a lecturer at the Exercise Science, Auckland University of Technology, one of the world's top sports and exercise science university from 2013 to 2017, lectured in osteopathy. It's Unitech, Auckland 2018, associate research supervisor with a master's thesis in injury prevention, PhD scholar, Auckland University of Technology, the effects of strength and power on sprinting speed in young female athletes. He was successfully prepared athletes for Cricket World Cup, Commonwealth Games, Rio Paralympics, World Championships, football, hockey, kayak, swimming, cycling, track and field, to name a few. Head of Women's Science in New Zealand's top private college, mentor 100 athletes across various sports, and lead a team of strength and conditioning coaches and researchers in exercise science. Sports science consultant, junior gold medalist in cycling 4,000 meters. We have many more, but since we are running short of time, over to you, Madam Claudia, with this brief introduction.
Okay, everybody presenter has 15 minutes and 5 minutes for QA, questions and answers. In this section, we have just 2 participants.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the introduction, Dr. Naya, and all you have done so far. And everyone in the panel, a very, very good evening from New Zealand. I'm in Auckland, New Zealand. And we have done a small study that we think that can be useful for practitioners and scientists. So I'd like to share without taking much of your time. I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope you're able to see my screen. So, as you know, I am a curious learner, and that has led me to different projects, which I've been really fortunate. And I've met really wonderful people who it's a collaborative work that I'm sharing this from. So I might be speaking about it, but there are many people who are involved, and I would like to thank them for the work. So this is a small study of a big cohort study that we have done. This is the effects of 8-week concurrent training on aerobic and anaerobic fitness in young female soccer players. Now, I'll give you a bit of a context about this. So my company, Athlete Institute, we work with a lot of young and elite athletes across maturation. So with the younger athletes, there are a lot of things that we are discovering now through a bit more applied research over the years. It's been a really interesting space, one that has actually opened my eyes in a lot of ways. So a bit of context, soccer, as we all know, it's got a lot of aerobic capacity demand, 70 to 80% of maximum oxygen uptake. So we know how demanding it is from aerobic perspective. And also, but it's just not the aerobic side of things, it's also the anaerobic side of things, which is the multiple bouts of high intensity activities, kicking, tackling, and sprinting. And because of the intermittent nature, start, stop, it can be quite fascinating in terms of development of physical preparation development, particularly for young athletes, who are actually going through the growth phase. So again, what is concurrent training? It's actually a method for people who's not aware of this term. It's a method that combines both aerobic and anaerobic form of training. Example, combining strength training with endurance training, which is the most common. Now, the significance in soccer, why? Because with soccer practice, it can be quite demanding. They're playing a lot of games over the week. This is where the practical and applied side of things comes in quite handy. Because on the field, soccer players, we're talking about, again, premier club players, they're playing 2-3 games a week, and they have a lot of practical training sessions, which is mainly to do with soccer itself. So we have very limited time for physical development, which is very, very crucial in terms of both injury reduction and also performance on the field. So limited time is one big key factor. And also the importance of both aerobic and anaerobic fitness. Unlike other sport where there is an opportunity to work throughout a cycling year, say, for example, if it's an endurance sport, you can actually build up and periodize accordingly in a more linear fashion. But because of the both competing demands of aerobic and anaerobic fitness, it can be quite challenging for practitioners. The problem with with concurrent training is that, we have, the research is quite clear in some of the interference effect. Now, of course, there is some interference because the pathway from physiologically perspective, aerobic and the anaerobic side of things are quite different and quite unique in their own way. And that's why if the volume is too high, it can interfere over the other. For example, there has been studies on more elite male athletes, how high volume of endurance training has affected their strength profiles and even muscle mass. So again, it's very important because if the strength factors are influenced too much, then things like force generating capacity can be also diminished. And there are but very limited studies, particularly in young and female athletes. So we don't know yet clearly in terms of how they affect in terms of overall performance and if there is any interference in that. So what we did from a pool of a big study, we had a small sample size. This is again a limitation of the study, I must say. With applied research, you must be all aware that there are always some issues in terms of the sample size. So we had 16 people. We had 10, they're randomly distributed. 10 of them were in the concurrent training group and 6 of them were in the control group. They were equally matched in terms of their ability. So there was no difference between anthropometrical or any physical performance measures. The intervention was basically conducted over 8 weeks. So the concurrent group, they did 2 sessions of concurrent training, which is combining strength and endurance together, aerobic and anaerobic training together, and with 1 session of soccer. The control group performed 2 soccer sessions for 8 weeks, and they did not perform any concurrent training during that time. Everything else in terms of the warm-up, cool-down was all standardized for both the groups. So all of them, they participated, they performed a standardized warm-up that required them to move in a multi-directional pattern. So like forward running, backward running, crossover, multi-directional movements, because it's very key for soccer players. And then muscle activation, joint articulation work that is quite helpful in terms of being more prepared for the demands of the sport itself. So the program overview, this is a snapshot of how we have done it. We know from the literature that we studied that the volume cannot be very high. So the goal was to, again, keep the volume on the lower side and see if we can influence any of the biomotor ability. So the program itself, if you can see, there's a combination of speed training. So lean, fall, sprint. I'll show you some video as well, what that looks like. So it's basically where they're doing different forms of sprinting. Again, sprinting is very, very important, especially acceleration, because overcoming inertia in the initial stage in a team sport like football and soccer is key determining factor, because unlike track and field, they're not running so far out. So the acceleration and quick change of direction, that's key. So that we want to develop as well. Then we added some plyometric training in the forms of like hurdle jumps, counter movement jumps, so like vertical jumps and horizontal jumps, which also I will show you some video demonstrations of them. And then some basic body weight manipulating the contraction types like eccentric and isometric with split squat and push-ups and unilateral upper body pull, along with some trunk. And then we finished the session with some high intensity interval running, which is again over a distance of 50 meters. They performed about 30 seconds of high interval running with a gap of 60 to 45 seconds. The intensity was around 16.75 kilometers per hour. So that's been done through individualized sessions for like how much distance they're covering in a particular time. We call it the maximum aerobic speed. So on basis of that, the average speed overall, everyone was basically in the program was running at the speed of 16.75 kilometers per hour or above. So a bit of a snapshot, what it looked like. So with horizontal jumps, the goal was to again quickly absorb force and also making sure they spend less time on the ground as they move from.
Let's go. Good work.
So this was again building that stiffness around the tendons, very, very important in terms of when we are looking at building the plyometric and strength side of things. Then we also looked at the acceleration. So, different progressions. So like say, for example, standing and doing the same acceleration work, which you'll see in the video, will be much easier. This is in a slow-mo and allows provides us a visual description of how they're accelerating the body, their movement, the orientation of the body in a more horizontal plane, which is again influencing the sprinting, and also gives us a good idea in terms of how individually they're preparing within the group itself. So with the speed training, also what we did was we made, initially they started very easier. So if the same thing was done standing, that's lesser inertia. So they're able to drive the body much more quicker. But when they're starting from the floor, because again, now they have to overcome greater inertia, so they have to put more force into it. Then assessments. So both pre and post, before the program, we had a battery of tests that we ran through. And these are the same and standardized battery of tests that's often used in most talent identification program. So that's a vertical jump. That's assessing how high someone jumps. Average of 4 repeated jumps, vertical jumps. So that's taking 4 jumps, average of that. And it also accounts for reactive ability. So how quickly someone, not only how high someone is jumping, but also how quickly they are spending, how much time they're spending on the ground as well as they jump high again. Single leg horizontal jumps and the yo-yo intermittent recovery test. This is again an aerobic to see the aerobic capacity. So it's an intermittent nature. It is very, all of these tests has been in terms of validated and also very highly reliable in this population. So we did this pre and post before the 8 weeks intervention, and then we did again after the 8 week intervention. With the results, there were some interesting findings. Control, we didn't see much improvements, of course, in the control group because they were mainly doing the soccer-based skill sessions, but we were expecting from our hypothesis that the concurrent group will improve some biomotor abilities. Interestingly, they improved single leg jump right and left with a very high effect size with HSG of 1.40. Yo-yo intermittent test also, there was a significant improvement, but again, the effect size was small. Probably there was more of an outlier in terms of within the population, there might be few who probably had a very higher means pre to post, and that's why it probably impacted. That's why we have a lower effect size. But nonetheless, it has improved. The yo-yo intermittent test, single leg jumps have been improved. Average vertical jump has improved. But the surprising, interesting finding here was the vertical jump did not really improve significantly, even though the average jump has improved. Now, we could base it in terms of that because our program, it had a lot of horizontal profile. We understand now from literature that force vector can play an important role. So basically how we are producing the force, like if you're doing, mainly our training was more horizontal based training. So they're moving forward and backwards as opposed to more vertical based training. And also our vertical training for the lower body did not include much of loading parameters. So we did not use heavy resistance training, which commonly used in that. So that's why we think that we did not see any improvements in terms of vertical jump. However, interesting bit was that average jump still improved. So maybe it may not have improved the vertical jump in absolute terms, but because average jump is also about how much time they spend on the ground, and that's a reflection of the fast, short, stretch shortening cycle, we call it. So because it's not just about how high, but also it's how much time is spent on the ground. And that's why we think that because of the training that we included a lot of explosive training, whether it's horizontal jumping or sprinting, and therefore we might have seen some improvement in terms of how much contact time, how much ground contact time they spend. So maybe that has driven the average. So this was an interesting finding, but we did not see any improvement in the control group. Conclusion and future direction. Definitely, I think CT effective in improving in this study, but we will be cautious to say that it can apply across for everyone. As a scientist, I would be skeptical about this information and put it in a broader framework that concurrent training itself will work for every population. But yes, if the dose response is right, if the volume is used in a specific manner, then it can be very, very helpful, because we are actually with this group in age group, if the age group is, you're looking at about 13 years to 14, and this is where the peak height velocity is also, they're shooting quite a bit, they're growing in terms of stature. So having the combination of different forms of training can be quite useful from a lot of other aspects as well. So we can say that yes, in this study we found that concurrent training that is combining aerobic and anaerobic training within the session can actually improve both aerobic and anaerobic capacity, but further investigation is required. One big issue in this study is that we have a very smaller sample size. We need a larger sample size to confirm this and further. We also need, because even though the participants in the study were highly trained soccer players, but they did not have much of a strength and conditioning background. So again, the improvements could also be because initially as a new adaptation process. We also need to account for maturation and training, greater training age. This is again very important because the age group, the chronological age might sometimes be misleading because they might be growing at different stature at different times. So it is very important that maturation and training age is also considered. And we should also in the future would be that we compare it with a more traditional training method. So for example, we could compare it with another two groups, which one group could be doing aerobic training and the other aerobic training only, and the other group could be doing anaerobic training, and then compare and contrast between the studies. So these have been the finding for us. It has been overwhelming because this is, like I said, this is a small part of overall big study that we've been doing. And this is what we found. And for me, because I've been working with a lot of elite athletes before, spending last 4 or 5 years with the young female athlete space has been really eye-opening in all accounts. And there's a much more for me to learn, both as a scientist and also as a practitioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I really like the idea, and I agree or I think that we have to upgrade some training model for the soccers, because my perception is that maybe in the past, the soccers, they usually run a lot and practice the technique of the soccer, right? But now we know that we have a lot of situations in the soccer where they have to sprint, where they have to jump, where they have to use the reaction abilities, and these were not trained, right, in the past. So I really appreciate your input and presentation. I really like it, and I think that it's useful and also good for the coaches. I would like to ask you, then in the end, you said that maybe the future direction could be anaerobic training and just aerobic training, and combine, compare these two, right? What do you mean, like anaerobic training for the kids? Is there some age limitation where we can use really anaerobic training?
Yes. So thank you for this. And what I mean with anaerobic training is that, so we could compare, instead of just having a concurrent training group that's combining the aerobic and anaerobic training group, we could have 3 groups. One could be the concurrent group that's combining the aerobic and anaerobic. One could be just aerobic training group. They're just doing aerobic training. And the last group could be the anaerobic. When I say anaerobic, it could be just basic strength and power, where the energy system is not influenced so much in the aerobic system, So what I mean in terms of physiologically, maybe the duration is much shorter, intensity is much higher. And so from that perspective.
Yes, for me, the coach has to be a little bit careful related to anaerobic training for the kids, because they really don't have the chemical reaction to absorb and to deal with the anaerobic capacity, right? When the trainers are too young.
Yes, this is a very interesting space, and I completely agree. Physiologically, they have to be ready enough, and that's why sometimes maturation, training age are very important determinants. So we have in a group of people who could be very experienced because they have had the physical exposure as they're growing up. Because as kids, what we found out with when we were doing a review, that many kids are already doing plyometric training, hopping, skipping at some form or the other. So when we talk about introduce that anaerobic side of things like plyometric, it is not exactly a new concept for them. At some level, they're still doing it. But I completely agree that we need to be careful. And when I say anaerobic, does not mean that they're lifting heavy weights, but it is more to do with how much of, in the energy system point of view, what they're using and how they're using. It could be some simple plyometric exercise. It could be some simple speed work, which is short and explosive. Which is again driving their nervous system to be able to be explosively able to move. So I'm talking about those things, and we realized recently, like not over the last few years, that so many kids, they have that movement. We call it the movement vocabulary. They have that vocabulary because they have been skipping. They're playing games like hopscotch. which is or some sort of a plyometric training, where they're in one leg on two legs. So that's why I think, yes, I completely agree. But I feel that some kind of anaerobic capacity should be introduced early on, without, of course, being as cautious as a practitioner.
Yes, thank you for your reply. If I can, I have last question.
Sure.
If you have some experience with coaching, with to be coach, I would like to ask you if there is the aerobic training, anaerobic training for the soccers, and also the technique training. How many days they should have training per week, or how would you divide? Like on Monday, or 2 times per week technique, 2 times per week aerobic program, or how you would suggest to train the soccers?
This is a very good question, but one that could also lead me into trouble. Because I say that because every soccer coach, they have their own unique ways, and it can be quite challenging. And I feel that sometimes we got to be very careful with the literature is quite clear in terms of early specialization. So especially with young people, with young soccer players, we got to be very careful in terms of how much they do it. It's very difficult for me to answer what is the right number. The right number would depend again on the athlete, their maturity, their training age, their exposure. So all of these things will play a very, very important role. So unfortunately, I do not have a specific answer as a number, how many, but I would say in this case, less is more. I would say less is more because we have the window. What I mean is that as we work with so many kids, and not just for soccer but also other sports, we realize that the exposure that they have, like we would like our soccer athletes who are competing at the high level go and play some other sport at some time, not for a competitive point of view, but just for a recreation point of view, from a socializing point of view, from a mentalist aspect as well. So again, coming back, because sometimes like we have in New Zealand, there could be a season where they're playing 5 days of soccer. 5 days of soccer, and they're still school kids with the academic profile. So I believe there should be context to that. So I cannot give you a right number, but yes, this is something that we need to address together, as a whole. Yeah.
Yes, everything has to be included into training. Yeah, but thank you for your excellent answer. I think you are really expert in your field. And I don't have any other questions, so thank you for your input. Yes, and there is an interesting question. What shall be the duration of concurrent training for age group training between 10 to 13 in terms of minutes?
In terms of minutes, we ideally like to stay everything within 60 minutes mark. So we will not go beyond an hour of training. Yeah, but that again, some needs to be tested further from a scientific perspective. So yes, I think that'll be interesting. This actually could be a study in itself in terms of what kind of duration is required. But ideally, because we think that there'll be again another thing with young people is that the attention span. So you don't want you want them to be involved as much, and they need to be there. So both from physiologically and also from a cognitive ability, we don't want it to be too long because it should be complementing their sport, which is soccer.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I think that it's time to thank you very much, Dr. Kaushik. It was excellent presentation, and I think we can move to our second one participant, which name is Usha.
Okay.